Kimiko is one of those characters where the idea is much better than the actual character. On paper, she should be one of the strongest people in the boys. She is a victim of Vought, a child soldier, a silent killer, a woman who was turned into a weapon before she ever got to be a person, and someone trapped between wanting peace and being very good at violence. That should be enough. That is already a full character. You do not need to keep adding more and more tragedy onto that until she becomes a walking storage unit for trauma. But that is what the show does. It keeps piling things onto Kimiko, and after a while, it stops feeling like character writing and starts feeling like the writers needed somewhere to dump pain. The problem with Kimiko is not that she has no good scenes. She does. The problem is that almost none of those scenes build into something clean. They feel powerful in the moment, then the show moves on, then later it remembers she exists and gives her another sad reveal. It is like the show keeps trying to convince us she is important by making worse things happen to her, instead of making her choices matter. There is a big difference. A character suffering is not the same as a character developing. Kimiko suffers constantly. She gets beaten, kidnapped, experimented on, mutilated, used, abandoned, and emotionally crushed. But after all of that, what is her actual arc? What does she believe at the beginning that she does not believe at the end? What decision does she make that changes the story because only she could have made it? That is where the character starts to fall apart. At the start, Kimiko works. She works because she is simple in a good way. The boys find her like an animal in a cage, but the point is that she is not an animal. She has been treated like one. She is dangerous, but she is also scared. She is violent, but she is also gentle. She cannot speak, but she is not empty. That early version of Kimiko has a clean power because the show is not explaining her to death yet. She is strange, damaged, and tragic, and Karen Fukuhara gives her a lot with very little. A look, a hand movement, a small smile, a sudden burst of violence. That is good acting. The character had presence before the show started over-decorating her with backstory. Her relationship with Frenchie also works at first. Not perfectly, but it works. Frenchie sees her humanity before everyone else does. He talks to her like she is a person when everyone else is still deciding whether she is a threat, a victim, or a weapon. There is something sweet in that, and for a while, it gives both characters warmth. The Boys is a nasty show, and that relationship gives it a pocket of softness. When Kimiko and Frenchie communicate through signs, glances, and weird little jokes, the show briefly remembers that not every emotional beat needs to be screamed over a corpse. Sometimes two broken people sitting next to each other is enough. But then the show does what The Boys often does. When it likes something, it keeps pressing the button until the button breaks. Kimiko and Frenchie stop being two characters with a bond and become a loop. They get close, they pull away, they feel guilty, they talk around their trauma, they almost choose happiness, something terrible happens, and then they are back in pain. After a while, their relationship stops feeling like it is moving forward and starts feeling like the writers are afraid to let them arrive anywhere. The show wants the emotional reward of their connection, but it also wants the constant tension of keeping them wounded. So it gives us affection, then guilt, then affection, then guilt again. At some point, that is not tragedy, that is stalling. Kimiko herself suffers the most from this because Frenchie often gets the more defined inner life. Frenchie has guilt, addiction, romance, sexuality, mistakes, old victims, self-hatred, and active moral conflict. He talks. He explains. He spirals out loud. Kimiko is usually beside him, carrying equal or worse damage, but the show often makes her the silent emotional mirror to his mess. She becomes the person Frenchie wants to save, then the person Frenchie feels unworthy of, then the person Frenchie loves, then the person Frenchie leaves behind, then the person who suffers because of Frenchie's death. Even when the story is supposedly about Kimiko, it keeps bending back toward Frenchie. That is where the character starts to make no sense. The show wants Kimiko to be independent, but it writes her like an attachment. It wants her to be a killer, but also a childlike innocent. It wants her to be a trauma survivor, but also the team's gore machine. It wants her to be funny, then heartbreaking, then terrifying, then cute, then tragic again. None of those things are impossible to combine. Real people are complicated. But with Kimiko, the show does not always combine them into a person. It stacks them like boxes. One episode, she is a brutal soup who can tear people apart. Another episode, she is the emotional center of Frenchie's guilt. Another episode, she wants to be normal. Another episode, she is back to being the indestructible murder tool. The ingredients are not bad. The recipe is messy. The worst part is that her powers make the writing even lazier. Because she can heal, the show can mutilate her over and over without consequence. She can be thrown through walls, ripped apart, shot, stabbed, and destroyed, and the audience knows she will probably get back up. That makes her violence visually shocking but emotionally weak. It is fake danger. You can only watch a character get brutally injured so many times before the body stops, meaning anything. Huey bleeding matters because Huey can die. Being hurt matters because he is human. Kimiko being blown apart becomes another gross gag with a sad face attached. The show wants us to feel the brutality, but it also trained us not to worry. Then the show gives her the whole arc about wanting to lose her powers and be normal, and that should have been a major turning point. That is a real idea. If your body has only ever been used as a weapon, would you want to keep the thing that makes you dangerous? Would you choose safety if safety also means losing the only advantage you have in a world that keeps hurting you? That is interesting. Kimiko losing her powers could have been the moment where the show finally made her define herself. But even that ends up being temporary. She gets pulled back into the same machine. The show touches the idea of her freedom, then it panics and returns her to function. Because the boys still need someone who can get torn in half and walk it off. This is the deeper problem. Kimiko is treated like a symbol more than a person. She represents trauma. She represents Vought's damage. She represents the cost of violence. She represents the hope that someone can still be gentle after being turned into a weapon. Fine. But what does she want besides peace in the broadest possible way? What is her worldview? What is her line in the sand? What does she argue for that nobody else does? Butcher has a worldview. Huey has a worldview. Starlight has a worldview. Homelander has a worldview. MM has a worldview. Even the Deep, stupid as he is, has a consistent pathetic logic. Kimiko often has feelings but not enough position. She reacts more than she drives. The Shining Light backstory is a good example of the show trying to fix this by adding more pain. We learn more about why she cannot speak, and yes, the reveal is horrible. Children forced to fight silently is a disgusting image, and it fits the cruelty of the show. It also gives her muteness a more specific wound. But by the time we get there, it feels less like the missing key to Kimiko and more like another file added to an already overloaded folder. The show had already established that her past was awful. Her family was destroyed. She and her brother were taken. She was turned into a weapon. She was injected with Compound V. She was used by extremists. At some point, adding another layer of trauma does not deepen the character. It just confirms what we already knew. Yes, her life was terrible. We got it. And that is the real weakness of Kimiko's writing. The show confuses explanation with payoff. Explaining why she does not speak is not the same as paying off her silence. Giving her another memory is not the same as giving her a conclusion. The first time she speaks should feel like the completion of something carefully built. Instead, it mostly feels like the show finally cashing a check it kept delaying. It is emotional because the actress sells it and because Frenchie matters to her. But structurally, it is thin. She speaks because she is losing him. So even her voice, the thing that should belong most to her, gets tied to Frenchie. That does not mean the scene has no power. It does. When Kimiko breaks and calls out, the rawness works. You understand why people responded to it. Karen Fukuhara makes the moment hurt. But again, a strong moment is not the same as a strong arc. The show can make you feel something for 30 seconds and still have done a weak job building the character across seasons. That is Kimiko in a nutshell. She has good moments trapped inside bad structure. By the end, the show gives her even more. Frenchie dies. Kimiko loses him. She regresses into silence. She gets turned into the key weapon against Homelander. She blasts him, strips away the power, and helps make the final victory possible. On paper, that sounds huge. Kimiko is essential to the ending, but even there, it feels weirdly empty. She becomes the device that lets the bigger story end. She is important mechanically, but not emotionally in the way she should be. The finale needs someone to depower Homelander, so Kimiko becomes the tool. That is not nothing in plot terms, but it is close to nothing in character terms. It does not suddenly make her whole journey clean. It just gives her a function at the finish line. And then she goes to France. That is supposed to feel peaceful. Maybe it does a little. After everything, she deserves quiet. She deserves a life without being used. But it also exposes the problem. After 5 seasons, Kimiko's final destination is basically escape. Not a belief, not a transformation we can clearly name, not a hard moral choice that defines her, just leaving the battlefield after losing the person who mattered most to her. There is sadness in that, but there is also a kind of emptiness. The show put her through hell, gave her love, took it away, used her as a weapon one last time, and then sent her somewhere else. That is not a full meal. That is leftovers with nice lighting. To give credit where it is due, Kimiko is not useless. She has style. She has memorable action. She gives the team a different emotional texture. Her silence, when handled carefully, makes her stand out. Her physical performance is often better than the writing around her. The sign language was a smart choice because it stopped her from being just the mute girl and gave her a real mode of expression. Her scenes with Kenji gave her pain a family shape. Her early scenes with Frenchie gave the show some badly needed tenderness. And there are moments where the contrast between her sweetness and her violence really lands. She can rip someone apart and then look like she hates that this is the only thing she is good at. That is the version of Kimiko the show should have trusted more. The issue is that the boys never seemed satisfied with that. It kept trying to make her deeper by making her sadder. That is a common mistake. Writers think trauma automatically creates depth, but trauma is not depth by itself. Depth comes from how a character responds, what they choose, what they refuse, what they learn, what they repeat, and what they finally break away from. Kimiko gets trauma, she gets reactions, she gets beautiful silent pain. But too often, she does not get the kind of agency that would make all of it land. So when people say Kimiko is a bad character, I would phrase it more specifically. She is a badly handled character. The actress is good, the concept is good, some scenes are good, but the long-term writing is not. The show kept treating her like she was one big emotional payoff waiting to happen. Then when the payoff came, it was either attached to Frenchie, attached to her powers, or attached to the larger Homelander plot. Rarely did it feel like Kimiko herself was the center of her own story. That is why she ends up feeling like a big nothing, even though technically many things happen to her. That sounds contradictory, but it is not. A character can have a huge amount of plot and still feel underwritten. Kimiko is proof. She has violence, tragedy, romance, silence, speech, powers, lost powers, new powers, revenge, guilt, and grief. She has all the parts of a major character, but the show never shapes those parts into one sharp argument. She is always almost there, almost the heart of the team, almost the best survivor story, almost the most tragic weapon Vought created, almost the person who breaks free from violence, almost the emotional soul of Frenchie's arc, almost. And after enough almost, the character starts to feel hollow. Kimiko should have been one of the best characters in The Boys. Instead, she became one of the clearest examples of the show mistaking damage for development. The show kept hurting her, then asking us to treat the hurt as progress. But pain is not progress. Blood is not a personality. Silence is not automatically mystery. And a tragic backstory does not matter if the character keeps ending up in the same place, sad, useful, and waiting for someone else's story to give her meaning. That is the real failure. Kimiko had every reason to matter. She just was not written like she mattered enough.